at the UN General Assembly in New York, when Captain Ibrahim Traoré began speaking before representatives of 193 countries. No one anticipated that one of the most shocking moments in diplomatic history would unfold in the next 18 minutes. As Traoré spoke in French, his words were being translated into English, Arabic, Chinese, Russian, and Spanish through the UN's official translation system. However, French-English interpreter Elena Michaels was altering Traoré's words to serve her own interests as African countries. We warned peaceful cooperation was being translated as we are launching a struggle against Western countries. This manipulation continued for 12 minutes, until Traoré listened to the English translation through his secret earpiece. At that moment, the most dramatic moment in UN history began. Traoré suddenly stopped mid-sep speech. 3,000 people in the hall held their breath. "One moment," he said into the microphone, turning his eyes toward the translation booths. "There's a problem with the English translation. I say peace. The interpreter translates war." Those words were broadcast to the entire world through the hall's microphones. Millions of people watching CNN, BBC, and Al Jazeera's live broadcasts were witnessing an important moment in diplomatic history. The expression on UN Secretary-General Antonio Guterres' face showed the seriousness of the situation. Panic began in the translation booths. Elena Michaels tried to turn off her microphone, but it was too late. Traoré announced that he would not leave the podium and demanded that the incident be clarified at this moment. Such a crisis had never been experienced in the UN's 78-tier history. "Honorable delegates," said Traoré, raising his voice, "I am currently speaking in French. Please, delegates who speak French, check the English translation. You will see dramatic differences between the translation and my original words." The hall turned into chaos. Delegates who spoke French began switching their headphones to check the translation. The Canadian Foreign Minister was the first senior official to notice the differences between the French-English translation. He opened his microphone. "Mr. President, there are serious discrepancies between what the president of BurkinaFaso said and the English translation." This statement caused great commotion in the hall. The Swiss delegate also made a similar statement. The English translation is not compatible with the original French text. This is a serious protocol violation. The astonishment on U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken's face was one of the most striking moments captured by cameras. Meanwhile, Elena Michaels tried to leave the translation booth. However, security officers had secured all translation booths at Traoré's request. "No one will leave the translation booths," said the UN security chief. "This incident needs to be investigated." Traoré, from where he stood at the podium, pointed to the translation booths. "The French-English interpreter in booth number 3 is deliberately manipulating the translation. I say peace, she translates war. I say cooperation, she translates threat. This is sabotage." The hall turned into complete chaos. Delegates were getting up from their seats. UN personnel were having rapid discussions among themselves. Translation. Booth microphones had been turned off, and world media began broadcasting breaking news. BBC correspondent commented, "Live such a crisis has never been experienced in UN history." A country leader exposed translation sabotage live on air. CNN also continued its broadcast with the headline, "Diplomatic Crisis Live." Antonio Guterres opened his microphone. "Honorable delegates, this is a serious situation. We are taking a 30-minute break from the session. An investigation will be launched." Immediately regarding this matter, however, Traoré refused to leave the podium. "I will stay here. This investigation will be conducted transparently before everyone's eyes." This demand was against UN protocol. But Guterres had to back down in the face of Traoré's determination. "With the approval of the General Assembly, the investigation will be conducted openly," he said. Meanwhile, Elena Michaels' background began to be investigated. The initial findings were shocking. Michaels had been an interpreter for 15 years and had never faced such an accusation before. However, suspicions arose that she had made similar manipulations in the past 6 months, particularly during African leader speeches. UN Internal Audit Division Director Sarah Mitchell explained the situation. "We are urgently reviewing Michaels' translations from the past 6 months. Initial findings indicate systematic manipulation." The statement deepened the crisis further. Traoré, in his statement from the podium, asked, "This is not limited to my speech alone. How many African leaders' words have been distorted? How many important decisions were made due to wrong translations?" These questions deeply shook the UN's credibility. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa took the microphone. "I remember that I also experienced translation problems in my speeches in the past 6 months. This matter should be seriously investigated." Delegates from Kenya, Ghana, and Senegal also expressed similar suspicions. Following these developments, the UN Secretary-General made an extraordinary decision. All African leaders' speech translations from the past 6 months will be re-examined. This process will be conducted transparently. Alina Michaels was removed from the translation booth under intense media attention. Journalists were trying to learn who she was working for and who was behind these manipulations. Initial investigations revealed that Michaels had connections with some lobby groups recently. Traoré also evaluated the media dimension of the incident, world public opinion. Misunderstood African leaders due to wrong translations. This is not just a translation error, but systematic disinformation. This statement resonated greatly in international media. French President Emmanuel Macron, in his statement from Paris, said, "This incident is unacceptable. As France, we are closely following the matter." The British Prime Minister made a similar statement. However, the harshest reaction came from the US. The White House spokesperson made the statement, "The UN's credibility has been damaged. We expect a comprehensive investigation into this matter." On the second day of the incident, Alina Michaels' statement was taken. Michaels admitted to the manipulations, but claimed she had received instructions. "I was told to translate African leaders' words in a more diplomatic way," she said. This confession took the crisis to a new dimension to the question, "Would you explain? Who gave you instructions?" Michaels replied there was pressure from various diplomatic circles. "I don't want to give names." This vague explanation fueled conspiracy theories. Following these developments, held a second press conference. This is not just an interpreter issue, it's part of systematic disinformation. Africa's voice is being deliberately distorted on international platforms. UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk, in his statement on the matter, said translation manipulation is a violation of freedom of expression. This matter should also be evaluated from an international law perspective. On the third day of the incident, statements began to be taken from other interpreters as well. Russian interpreter Ivan Petrov stated, "Recently, there have been unusual pressures in the translation department. Some people wanted certain country leaders' words to be corrected." Chinese interpreter Li Wei also gave similar statements, especially, "For developing country leaders' speeches, we were advised to make softer translations." This statement showed the dimensions of the incident. Not only Alina Michaels, but the entire translation system had systematic manipulation. Traoré filed an official complaint with the UN. As BurkinaFaso, we demand comprehensive reform from the UN on this matter. The translation system must be completely reorganized. The African Union also intervened in the matter. African Union Commission Chairman Moussa Faki stated, "This incident is an example of systematic discrimination against the African continent. Necessary legal steps will be taken." On the fourth day of the incident, an extraordinary session was held at the UN General Assembly. In this session, the reform of the translation system was discussed. Traoré presented his proposals. Each country should be able to bring its own interpreter. The translation system should be transparent. All translations should be recorded. Thus, proposals were supported by many countries, especially developing countries. Announced that they had experienced similar problems. The Brazilian delegate said, "As Latin American countries, we have also experienced problems in Spanish-English translations." The Indian delegate also made similar complaints. These statements showed that the problem was not limited to Africa. The UN's translation system was experiencing a general credibility crisis. On the fifth day of the incident, the results of the security report investigating Alina Michaels' connections were announced. It was revealed that Michaels had financial connections with various lobby companies. The New York prosecutor's office also took up the matter. Ethical violations by UN personnel are matters to be taken seriously. Was the statement made? Michaels was detained on the sixth day. Among the charges were abuse of duty and ethical violations. Traoré, in his statement about the detention, said, "Justice has been served, but this is just the beginning." The system must change fundamentally. The UN reform process also accelerated. Secretary General Guterres announced the establishment of the Translation Reform Commission. The commission would include representatives from every continent. Accepted commission membership, we will work to ensure Africa's voice is heard correctly. He said in the second week of the incident, the topic of translation transparency began to be intensely discussed in the media. Translation and media manipulations began to be questioned worldwide. Social media platforms were also affected by this. Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube began announcing new policies on algorithm transparency. Google Translate also announced that it was reviewing its translation algorithms. Technology companies began developing new standards for translation accuracy. In the third week of the incident, translation reform was voted on at the UN General Assembly. 156 countries voted in favor, 15 countries against, 22 countries abstained. The reform package included simultaneous recording of both original language and translation versions of each speech, interpreters signing independence declarations, continuous auditing of translation, quality, rapid response system for complaints. Traoré, in his statement after the vote, said this is the democratization not only of the UN, but of all international diplomacy. During the one-man process of the incident, the lobby companies that Alina Michaels worked for were also put under investigation. It was revealed that these companies had been conducting systematic disinformation campaigns to influence various countries' policies. The European Parliament took up the matter. The EP president said this incident is an alarm bell for protecting our democratic institutions. The NATO Secretary General also commented on the matter. Disinformation is the greatest security threat of the 21st century. In the second month of the incident, the court process called the Michaels case began. The case heard in the New York Federal Court had the feature of being a precedent in international law. Traoré was heard as a witness in court. This was not just a translation error, it was deliberate manipulation. This situation prevented small countries from making their voices heard on international platforms, he said. Michaelis's lawyers claimed that their client did not manipulate, but only softened some expressions due to diplomatic courtesy. However, technical analysis showed that there was systematic distortion. In the third week of the court, the report, presented by voice analysis expert Dr. Robert Chen, was very important. There was a 78% semantic difference between Michaels' translations and the original speeches. He said, this rate was too high to be explained by accidental errors. The prosecutor commented, this is evidence of professional sabotage. The jury found Michaels guilty after 6 hours of deliberation. The judge sentenced her to 18 months, suspension from duty, and a $50,000 fine. Traoré, in his statement after the decision, said, justice has been served. This decision is the victory of transparency in international diplomacy. In the 6th month of the incident, the UN's new translation system was gradually implemented. The system was based on quality control, verification, and transparency principles. The first test was conducted with Traoré's new UN speech. This time, all translations were performed perfectly. The hall gave a standing ovation. The scandal that happened here 6 months ago has made the UN stronger today, said Traoré. Now no country's voice can be distorted. On the first anniversary of the incident, the UN translation reforms had been largely completed. The UN had become a more reliable platform in terms of translation. Academic circles described the incident as the most important diplomatic reform of the 21st century. At Harvard Kennedy School, courses are being taught under the name the Traoré case. Alina Michaels could not obtain work permits at any international organization after serving her sentence. Lobby companies also faced heavy penalties. On the second anniversary of the incident, Traoré made a special speech at the UN. The crisis we experienced here 2 years ago taught us this. Democracy is a precious heritage that requires constant protection. This speech was met with a 15-minute standing ovation. All delegates appreciated Traoré's courage. Today, the UN translation system is accepted as a world standard. Other international organizations are also making similar reforms. Traoré's historic moment became a turning point for transparency and honesty in international diplomacy. The comment was made. An 18-minute speech moved diplomacy forward by 18 years. As a result, Traoré's brave stance at the UN not only triggered a translation scandal, but also international system reform. The manipulation he exposed live that day now forms the basis for more transparent and fair diplomacy worldwide. The behind-the-scenes story of this incident was also noteworthy. The preparations Traoré made before his speech determined the course of the event. The BurkinaFaso delegation had developed a coordinated strategy with other African countries the day before the UN speech. This strategy aimed to make African counts' voices heard more strongly at the UN. The advisors accompanying Traoré also played a critical role. Particularly, language expert Dr. Aminata Khan had recommended that Traoré also listen to the English translation while speaking in French. This recommendation was a key factor in uncovering the scandal. Immediately after the incident, the world media's reaction came very quickly. The #UN translation scandal became trending topic within minutes on social media. Shares were made on Twitter. The video of the incident moment got 50 million views on YouTube within 24 hours. Especially the reaction of the African diaspora was very strong. African communities in London, Paris, and New York organized protest demonstrations in front of the UN building. The slogan, "You cannot distort Africa's voice," echoed in the social reaction, also mobilized politicians. An emergency session was held in the French Parliament. Deputies emphasized that translation manipulation posed a threat to democracy. The British Parliament also expressed similar concerns. The incident also had a great impact in the academic world. An urgent symposium on translation, ethics, and international diplomacy was organized at Columbia University. A panel on media manipulation and democracy was held at Harvard. Alina Michaels' personal story also attracted media attention. Canadian Michaels had studied translation and interpretation at McGill University. In her 20-year career, she had never been involved in such a scandal. Her colleagues had difficulty understanding her behavior. Michaels' family was also greatly affected by the situation. Her husband and 2 children went through difficult days under intense media attention. The family had to temporarily leave their home in Montreal. The technological dimension of the incident also created important developments. Tech giants like Microsoft, Google, and Apple announced new security measures regarding translation algorithms, technologies to prevent manipulation in AI-supported translation systems began to be developed. Blockchain technology was also proposed for translation security. The idea of recording translations in an immutable way was supported by technology experts. The UN's own technology infrastructure was also reviewed. New security cameras were installed in translation booths. All communications of interpreters began to be recorded. The psychological impact of the incident also lasted a long time. When Traoré described that day, he said, "At that moment, I felt I was representing not just my own country, but all of Africa." This sense of responsibility was influential in his brave decision. Other African leaders were also inspired by Traoré's courage. In subsequent UN meetings, African countries began to take more active roles. They also began to be more careful about translation. The incident also set a precedent from an international law perspective. Translation manipulation began to be accepted as a new legal category. The International Court of Justice prepared new guidelines on this matter. As a result, Traoré's historic moment was not just the exposure of a scandal, but the beginning of a transformation that made global diplomacy more transparent. This incident became a historic lesson for future generations, teaching how critical proper communication is for democracy.